Welcome to my presentation, Friendly Fascia, Unravel the Secrets Within Our Body's Connective Tissue. So if you don't know me, I'm Neal Armstrong, the fitness coordinator at the Covington. And I am excited to give this presentation because it's something that I am very interested in. There's a lot of potential here as we learn more about it for pain relief, especially as we get older, and just having better connection to the body. So if you look at the background, it's all of that kind of spindly web, essentially. And that's a picture of fascia. There's not very many pictures of fascia, but as we look at it, it comes in different shapes, but generally the way I think about it is kind of like a web. So we can start with just a general, what is it? And if you're wondering, you're looking at it. So I think this picture, someone took a little camera underneath someone's skin and essentially photographed the fascia. So it literally looks like a web. And another way to think of it would be like a bag. And I'll explain that in the next slide. But so fascia, essentially, it's the fabric of our body that holds everything together. So the cells, the bones, the muscles, the organs, all of it. And it's one entire structure that it houses the whole body. So rather than thinking of, your arm as one separate thing and then the other and the leg, there's a relationship in fascia to everything. So if you, think about it like a spider web, and when like a little fly lands in the spider web, that vibration is sent to the spider so that it knows that something is there. And the same, is kind of true if you think of like a sweater that you knitted. And if you get like a little snag in the sweater, it starts to unravel maybe on the other side or somewhere in the sweater, because the whole thing is connected. So as you see there, it's one continuous structure, and it's essentially everywhere, even places like your eyes, it's there as well. The only place that they haven't found it is in parts of your digestive tract and parts of the respiratory system. So it's in the bones, it's in the muscles. The picture that's on the left there is another picture of fascia. And again, you can see that kind of web structure of it. It's kind of creepy looking. So we have our anatomy man right here. And obviously we see all of that red, that's his muscles. Now, granted, there's fascia in there, but where there's big parts of fascia, for instance, is in some of those white areas. So if you look near the lower back, that big white surrounding area near the spine is fascia, and you can kind of see it moving through the body. So sadly, throughout history, they haven't really looked at fascia, they haven't really studied it. When they would do dissections of bodies, they would pretty much throw it away because they didn't think, it was useful or anything. So as we've started to study it, it's very useful. It's involved in everything. So from like an anatomical perspective, there's kind of a shift happening where it's not so much about like individual muscles, your bicep, your core, your glutes or something, but it's about thinking about everything and how they relate to one another. So if you were to think about the body fascially, it's a weird word, the way that they would think about it is say, okay, you hurt your shoulder. Well, in most cases, that's not necessarily the problem. The problem is probably somewhere else, maybe your hip, maybe your foot or your arch, something like that. So it's similar, for instance, in like medicine, you can go to a doctor and he can treat the symptom, which might provide some temporary relief, but nonetheless, you're chasing symptoms. And then hopefully, you know, if you were to find a really good doctor, they're looking for the root cause of the problem so that not only do you have no more symptoms, but the problem itself disappears. So with fascia, we're just thinking of whole body movement patterns and how, you know, daily movement, daily living, daily stresses factor into what happens to our posture and just the general feel of our body. So our fascial system, it's remodeling, it's regulating itself basically all day long, every day of your life. And the way it regulates itself is either from physical stress, emotional stress, any kind of trauma, be it physical or something else. And, you know, if you were, for instance, sitting in a chair like this, hunched over all day long, your fascial system is going to remodel itself based off of that. And eventually your posture becomes that kind of hunchback, you know, very unpleasant looking thing. So I have a couple pictures on this one, and they're a nice illustration. If you look at the top left, you have two pictures there. The leftmost one, I'm guessing it's like a muscle fiber, and it looks real jagged, real messy. And then you have the one right next to it. It's neatly ordered. It has a clear pattern. And the same goes on the picture on the right. The left side looks nice and neatly ordered. And then you have your knotted up thing with adhesions, scar tissue, whatever it is. And now you might be wondering, how does your fascia change to knot itself up like that? Basically, when you get older, your fascia dries out. So as it dries out, it starts to get little knots, little adhesions. And if you were to, you know, lift someone's skin up and look at it and find the knots, you can literally see them. It looks kind of messy. And we'll get into, you know, how you restore fascia and how you train it essentially in just a few slides. So there are a couple ways, well, there's many of these, but I call them flexibility highways. Some people call them anatomy trains. Basically they all relate to a highway, right from A to B kind of thing. So I'm gonna break apart the main ones, and you know, we'll start here with the back line. So pretty self-explanatory. If you look at the diagram there, you have fascia that you can start it from the top of the skull, base of the foot, doesn't matter. But there's a whole network essentially that goes from the bottom of your foot up into the lower back, and then it wraps around to the forehead here, essentially. So that whole system there, when you're walking, whatever, it's communicating throughout itself and then to the rest of the body. So that back line is especially important in being upright, right? Holding good upright posture. And if we do a little consideration here, any strain, tension, and this is good and bad tension, trauma, whatever, and then just force from moving is passed through these lines. So to illustrate, you know, let's say you have a bad arch in your foot or something, and over time, that can lead to breakdown throughout the chain. And, you might wonder, okay, so how do I stretch this? How do I strengthen this? So basically, any kind of bending movement is going to stretch that back line. So hopefully, right, we're bending from our waist rather than the actual back itself. And you can experiment with that. You know, if you bend yourself over, you might feel a stretch in the calves or maybe the hamstrings, possibly the back. And then depending on how you play with it, say, are the knees straight or are the knees bent, you'll feel either more, less, it might feel more throughout the body. But that's a key point, right? In bending, we can use our knees to help lessen some of the force basically that is distributed through this back line. So if we're looking for strength, a simple one is to just stand or sit with as good of posture as you can. And you can think of it where you have like a little flashlight on your chest bone here. And if you're pointing the light down, right, that's a collapse of posture. So if you can kind of shine your light up and then drop your shoulders, well, there you go. You have the engagement of at least the back if you're sitting. And then if you're doing traditional strength training, essentially anything that you're pulling is going to target this line. So, you know, pulling a door closed, taking a resistance band, looping around something, pulling it toward you. All of those will help strengthen this line. So to go to our next one, we have the front line. And again, you can see here, it's basically divided into two parts, two pathways. So you have the top of the foot reaching up basically to your pelvis. And then from the groin area up, and then it loops back around the head right there. So kind of like a strap on an apron or something. And obviously the front line, it's also incredibly important in just maintaining balance and distributing force from the backside to the front side. And not only that, it's basically protecting all of those soft, sensitive organs that are in the front of your body. So in that sense, right, humans are unique in that we just expose all of our organs, you know, to the world, and most animals don't do that. So to consider the impacts of how this line suffers, right, we all lead chair-centric lives. Most of the stuff I enjoy doing is done in a chair. And there's nothing wrong with sitting, assuming it's not all you do, but when we're sitting, this whole front line, it gets shortened. So it becomes very important to stretch that front line. And the way that you do that would just be extension movements. So if you open the chest in this kind of way, doing things like lunges, taking a step behind you, or just extending the spine backward, you can call it a back bend. All of those are going to help to stretch this area, which in my experience of working with people, it's very understretched. So to go to the other side of that, if you're strengthening this area, in general, most pushing movements are going to target the front of the body. So it would kind of, it makes sense, right? If you're looking to target the back line, you're pulling. And if you're looking for the front line, you're pushing. So, you know, say you have a walker or something that has a little chair on it, you can put some kind of heavier object and push it, and then, hey, you're training your front body. Another way to do that, and this is true for the back body, is to just walk, to sit upright, to carry objects in your hands that are different weights. right? Resistance bands, again, pushing exercises. So let's go to our next line, which is the lateral line. So this is your side body. And this one extends from the bottom of the foot, if you see there, kind of side of the foot, and then it goes up, 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 underneath the rib cage, and then into kind of the base of the skull there. So interestingly, if you are looking at the rib cage area, it's basically woven kind of like a basket, and it's underneath the bones of the ribs. So where this line comes into play is balancing front body, back body. So anytime we're walking, we're moving, right? We live in 3 dimensions. So that side body is what's really heavily stabilizing us from those rotational forces. And, you know, as this line weakens, as it tightens, we start losing that capability. And in some cases, you could have the knees start buckling together, maybe buckling outwards. And even worse, right, the side body. So when it gets scarred, tight, whatever, weak, basically this can start pushing your head forward. It can throw off your shoulder mobility. And, you know, in like a worst case scenario, it can literally take your rib cage and move it over. So now if you were to try and go move around with that new posture, you'd be in lots and lots of pain. So if you're looking for stretch of the lateral line, basically any kind of side bending movement, pushing your hips left and right is going to target it, lifting your arm, right, within capability of your range, crossing your legs, crossing your arms, all of this sort of cross, little bit of a turn movement will help to stretch this. And then from our strength perspective, it's pretty much the same in that, again, walking is effective here, and doing some side steps, right? So stepping to the left, stepping to the right, moving your weight left and right. Now, if you were looking for something more, a little stimulating, you can take, say, ladies, like your purse, put some stuff in it, and then, you know, something else in your hand, maybe, I don't know, a 4-pound weight, 2-pound weight. And then essentially you just walk around your apartment, outside, wherever. You can move your arms around. Doesn't have to be even weight. You obviously switch it back and forth. But all of that is going to put a demand on the side body to basically stabilize, to help you stay upright so that you don't, you know, tip over. So let's get to our next line, which is the spiral line. And I like this one just because it looks cool. So it's 2 sets of spirals, or a new word I learned, helixes. And you can see there's a kind of X pattern in the back. So if you look at the left leg, it's connecting to the right side of the pelvis, and then the right side to the left side of the pelvis. And then if you were to go to the front body, it's the same thing. That left, basically highway of fascia, crosses the midsection, the right side crosses to the left. So again, this spiral line is helping us maintain balance in all dimensions, so 3 dimensions, but especially in rotational force, which is in everything. So this line, you know, it cuts through most of the other highways, because again, it's not isolated things. It's all one system. So this one I thought was interesting because it's crucial in coordinating the arch of your foot. and stability of the knee and the pelvis. So I didn't realize this, but the arch of your foot is in some ways connected to the curvature of your spine. So that little natural lift of the arch, as it starts to flatten with age or with misuse or whatever, right, it travels up the back, maybe into the hips. And then, maybe you have severe back pain and you go to doctors, specialists, and they just can't really figure out why, because they're looking solely at your back, right? When again, it could be resulting from your foot or the pelvis or something. So if you have imbalance in this, it can take your torso, your shoulders, your head, and literally push it to the side. And if you want to experiment next time you're walking, right, try and move your rib cage and your torso off to the side and then walk. It's not comfortable at all. So to stretch this line, again, turning, twisting, bringing your arm across the body, bringing the leg across the body, it's all going to target this line. And then if you're going for strength, again, rotations and twists. And if you add additional weight, right, it's additional resistance. So with the spiral and the other rotational line, we have to be really careful just because rotating is one of the harder things to coordinate, and it's actually associated with a lot of just general injuries. So there's basically movement centers that when we're turning, the turn come from there. So the first one is your shoulders. The second is going to be your hips, your pelvis. And then the third is your foot. So when you're walking, when you're turning, try and pay a little attention to where is this turn coming from? Am I turning my shoulders, my hips, my feet? Or, am I letting the knee do the work, or my lower back, even worse, right? And you can feel the torque in those joints. Doesn't feel good. So I believe this will be the last line that we cover, and it's our arm lines. So with this one, it's broken down into 2 layers, and you basically have your deep layer, and then you have the superficial layer, so the one that's closer to the skin. And this highway runs from this little place in your thumb and up into the arm. It goes into the chest, your back, your rib cage, and your neck. So this one is a little tricky because it's woven through the shoulder in multiple ways. So again, that's why shoulders generally are really hard once they start losing their capability to work with, because there's so many delicate kind of moving parts. So our arm lines, they're helping you move your shoulders, articulate your fingers, stabilize your head, obviously. And so if we look at our hunchback posture, it is partly coming from shoulders that are being pushed forward and then lifted. And again, if you want to try walking around like this, it's really uncomfortable. So like I mentioned a couple minutes ago, that scapular movement, which is your shoulders, it's essential to not only posture, but to just maintaining good functioning, capable body. So to stretch this, you have any sort of reach of the arm, lifting, right? Moving your hands behind you, kind of dropping the shoulders, maybe reaching the fingers together. And again, you can tilt the spine sideways so that you can kind of target the ribs. And In a lot of these lines, you'll notice that they are under the ribs or they're over the ribs. And there's some implications there where if this fascia gets tight, dry, loses strength, elasticity, whatever, it can start interfering with your actual lung capacity. So if you're really tight, you're not going to be able to get a full breath into the lungs. And so basically what that leads to is anxiety and your body basically floating or staying in your fight or flight response, which long term is very destructive. So an additional way to stretch it would be deep breathing. And again, that's not breathing into the chest, it's breathing down toward the belly button. So for strength, this one's a little more obviously intuitive. You've got things like bicep curls, tricep extensions, anything with a resistance band. Other really good ones are sport-like movements, you know, tossing a ball with your friend back and forth, pushing movements, pulling movements. So really any use of the arm is going to contribute towards some strength depending on your capability. So our next little section here will be how do you train the fascia? Because it's a little different than going to the gym and training your bicep to get stronger. So I have 4 principles for you. And the first one is through vectors. So basically it just means angles. And so preface, I'm not saying strength training machines are bad here, but they don't adequately give us 3-dimensional stimulation. So they're really good for, you know, specific targeted strength. But again, they can't produce enough variety, right? It's just, they're not designed that way. So in some cases, you know, if you do a bunch of strength machines and really not much else, you can actually predispose yourself to injury because again, it's really repetitive movement. And if other systems around that are not necessarily primed, again, you might have little tears or strains that kind of gather in the fascia, and eventually you'll feel that. So do your strength training, but also you want to look at activities like, again, throwing a ball, getting into the pool and swimming, walking in the pool. Another really nice way to train them is through rope systems. So some machines, you know, it's basically rope pulling, really awesome. And again, it's more dimensions than say one specific set angle. So our next principle is lengthening of fascia. And the key thing here is fascia lengthens very slow. So you can build strength in your muscle pretty fast. You cannot lengthen your fascia quickly. So we want to stretch into the fascia slowly so that you allow it to open and that you're not, you know, pulling on it and creating tears. So if you've done yoga, if you've done Tai Chi, basically we're at that level of slowness, right? And the slower, the better. So again, if you go too quickly and your fascia isn't ready, it's likely to tear. These are things that you won't really feel in the moment, right? They're micro tears. So, and again, this is one of the most common injuries that people deal with. Little strains, little things that are rooted in kind of repetitive movements that you do over and over. So for instance, getting out of a chair, right? If you're not necessarily aligned as you get out of the chair, and you're doing that over 10 years, you know, that's, I don't know how many thousands upon thousands of times, but you're building up little micro tears. And then maybe one day, oh, your back is completely out, right? And then it's a trip to the doctor. So the key thing is they accumulate over time. And if you don't release the fascia, it stays, right? So those tears stay. And when you build new muscle over it, it's building over that tear, over that knotting. So really important to lengthen it. That'll kind of restore it back to more of a neutral. So our next principle is hydration. And this one isn't so much about drinking water to hydrate your fascia. It's more about hydrating your fascia through movement. So that second little point there, like squeezing a sponge, you need muscular effort to hydrate your fascia. So this basically just means movement. Other ways that you can do this is through certain movement patterns that are targeting those flexibility highways. Massage is a really great way to do this. And you can do it yourself, you know, just kind of poke around, squeeze around. We also have myofascial tools, which I'll show you a couple popular common ones that you'll see. And depending on, you know, your fascia, in some cases, just poking around, you can literally find the knots, right? And you can feel them. So normally if you're feeling like, say, your forearm, for instance, it should be pretty supple, right? Kind of squishy, not firm, soft, movable. If you're feeling around and you're finding like a lump or a really firm spot, that's probably an indicator that you need to work on releasing it through massage, moving, etc. So our last point is elasticity. And this one kind of builds off of all of the other three, in that it is done at more of an athletic speed. So it's characterized by like rhythmic bounciness. So the reason for that is that in every movement that you do, let's take sitting into a chair, for example. When you're sitting, your muscles are absorbing a bunch of energy so that you can either sit successfully, or if you needed to, you could stand back up. And then you would, in standing, release all of that energy that you stored. So when we get into trouble is when our body can't properly store that energy. And you would know this is happening is, for instance, when you sit and your knees really ache, perhaps your back really aches when you sit. That's a sign that your joints are doing more than they need to, and that your muscles are probably weak and that you need to work on strengthening. So basically activities like running, let's call it like power walking, and then especially dancing. These are all going to develop that elasticity. So meaning, can your fascia pull a little bit and then come back to that regular rested state? So hopefully you can see why you wouldn't want to just start, you know, going running when you haven't properly stretched your body, you haven't hydrated your fascia, you haven't gone through, you know, a variety of different movement patterns, because your body's just not going to be able to absorb that in and out energy. So I think the next slide, yeah, fascial release tools. So the first picture I have here, it's someone getting a massage. Again, really go do it. You know, get a massage, find someone that you like. It doesn't matter the technique because there are many of them, but it's really effective at having another person look around who knows the anatomy of the body to find those adhesions and then work on releasing them. So our next one is a pretty new kind of device. It looks like a gun. And basically what it is, it's kind of percussion therapy. So what that machine does, and I've used it, it's very intense. There's a variety of different attachments, but it beats at a very, very fast tempo. And, you know, you can put it on anywhere really, not bone, and within seconds, it'll start forcing, literally forcing your muscle to relax. So no different than, say, what a masseuse is trying to do. They're trying to find those tense points and then get them to relax. This gun is doing that very quick. And afterwards, hopefully, you know, you have like a rush of euphoria, release, it feels relaxed. But again, this route can be very intense. So our next option here is, let's call them self-myofascial release tools. So they're more traditional. You have that kind of rod looking thing that basically it's almost like a foam roller, if you're familiar with that. You can use it to roll the legs, the stomach, right, side body, anywhere that you can reach, the neck, and that little helix looking thing, again, same thing, you would roll it along the body, and basically you're looking for those kind of sensitive knots. The balls, which I own some of those and I love them. They're really, really cool because they're different sizes and different densities. So they're really nice in places like the feet or in the hands, the forearms, even through the jaw or the neck. And that kind of double bound one is called a peanut. Those, you know, you can roll through the spine, and it's designed in a way that you're rolling just along the edge of the spine, not the actual spine itself. So the last one, again, this is just your traditional foam roller. It kind of works the same way as the one I just went over, in that you lie on it, you roll until you find a pressure point, little sensitive spot, and then ideally you would just, once you find that point, sit, lie on it, rest on it. And again, you're just waiting and hoping that the muscle starts to soften and relax a little bit. So they're all useful things to do for self-care. The warning or caution, let's say, I will give with these things is they're temporary relief. So some people respond really positively to them. Other people, they don't respond at all. And just what they've found in studies is, like with the foam roller, for instance, or even massage, they can open you up and you'll feel great maybe for the rest of the day, but your body will return to its rested state. So again, if your posture is like this and you have a really great massage session and you end up like that, cool, you'll feel good. But little by little, you will go back to this place because this is just where your fascia has basically modeled itself to. So the real trick for creating lasting results is having a professional to be there to help you that can identify, you know, where in your posture, where in your movement do these little breakdowns occur. And then they can work with you in correcting those things and basically relearning how to move your body in a way that isn't going to trigger those little pain points, or it's not going to kind of rub the joint in the way that it's used to. And I've been reading about just success stories with this, and for some people it's tremendous that, you know, they've lived with chronic pain for years and they've gone from doctor to doctor, surgeon to surgeon, specialist to specialist, and they basically don't have anything for them to do, right? They just, well, it's kind of how you are now. But there's some people that are working with fascia that are really learning about this, and they're looking at the body in a different way, and they can see, you know, the relationship, say, between your shoulder pain and what's happening in your foot. And then they can work with you in correcting those habits so that, you know, they're not going to cure your bones or anything, but you can learn to move in a way that's not going to hurt you. So I think into the future, as we start adding more and more of this into the practice of just fitness and movement, it has a lot of potential to re-educate people how to move. And this is for young and old, right? We're all sitting in chairs. We all have phones, right? The head is always coming forward. So sooner or later, we're going to have to relearn how to move our bodies. And learning a little bit about our fascia gives us more of that sort of big picture rather than focusing on those little itty bitty details. So with that, that is all I have for you.